Her husband threw his pregnant black wife out on the street 1 month later. The unthinkable happened. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from today. The morning sunlight came through the light curtains, making golden shapes on the shiny wooden floor of the living room. Everything looked nice and neat. The bookshelf was clean, the cushions were lined up perfectly on the cream-colored sofa, and the sweet smell of vanilla candles floated in the air. A small ceramic angel sat by the fireplace, its wings open like it was hugging the quietness. In the kitchen, the soft hum of the fridge mixed with the ticking of the wall clock. Together, they made a soft beat that felt like the heart of the house. If someone stood at the door, they would think this house was a picture of peace, a perfect and happy home. And for a long time, everyone believed that too. Liana, the lady of the house, loved the little things in life. She loved how the sunlight warmed her arms when she washed the dishes. She loved the way the leaves whispered outside her bedroom window at night. Liana found happiness in the simple routines she shared with her husband, Jason. They had met 8 years ago at a meeting for people who helped in charities. Jason was charming and funny, and he had a laugh that made people want to be near him. Liana was quiet and kind, with deep, thoughtful eyes. They connected right away, like magic, like the universe had placed them together on purpose. Jason asked Liana to marry him after a year. They got married under a big oak tree in a small ceremony with family and friends. Liana remembered how Jason's fingers shook a little when he put the ring on her hand, and how he whispered, "We've got this," just before their first kiss as husband and wife. It felt like the start of something very special. The first years of marriage were filled with small joys and shared dreams. They bought a little house after saving up for a long time. It wasn't big or fancy, but it had character. The wooden floors creaked when they walked, and Jason even fixed up the narrow staircase himself. There was a garden in the back where Liana planted tulips every spring. They painted a nursery room light blue, even though they didn't have a baby yet. They just had hope. They dreamed about having kids, curly-haired toddlers running in the backyard, family dinners, and singing lullabies at night. But months passed, then years, and no baby came. Each time the pregnancy test was negative, Liana felt a silent pain, but she stayed strong, even when she felt empty inside. Jason stayed by her side for a while. He held her hand at the doctor's office and told jokes to make her smile. They tried everything, eating healthy, taking medicines, even doing IVF treatments. But nothing worked. Then, one gray afternoon, something finally changed. Liana looked at the test and saw 2 lines. She stared at it for a long time, hardly breathing. She didn't jump or scream. She just sat there, holding the small plastic test like it was treasure. That evening, when Jason came home, she handed him the test without saying anything. For a moment, she saw happiness flash in his eyes. He picked her up, laughed loudly, and said they were finally getting their miracle. The next day felt magical. Liana floated through life, dreaming of tiny shoes, baby songs, and holding her newborn. She even started knitting little hats and socks. Jason was there, making her tea in the mornings and putting his hand on her growing belly when they watched TV. But then things began to change. Jason started coming home late. Sometimes he sat in his car, looking at his phone before coming inside. He stopped asking about the baby and began canceling plans. Liana told herself it was just stress. She believed that once the baby was born, everything would be okay. One Tuesday, everything fell apart. The sky was gray. Liana had just returned from the doctor and was sitting in the living room with her hand on her belly, sipping chamomile tea. Jason walked in, dropped his keys into a bowl, and didn't even say hello. He stared out the window and then said, "I can't do this anymore." Liana blinked. "What do you mean?" she asked. His voice was low and calm. Us, the baby, it's not what I want," he said. Liana couldn't understand. She sat frozen, her hands cold. "You said," she tried to speak. "I know what I said," Jason interrupted, "but I didn't mean it. I thought I could be that man, but I was wrong. Liana could hardly breathe. And the baby? She whispered. Jason looked away. You'll figure it out. You always do. Then he added, I need you to leave. The house is in my name. I'll give you a few days to pack. Time seemed to stop. Liana's world broke apart. Her baby kicked softly inside her, like it was protesting too. Later, Liana stood on the porch with 2 duffel bags. The afternoon wind pulled at her coat. Jason was already gone. No goodbyes, no sorry, just silence. She looked back at the house where she had dreamed of hearing a baby's first laugh. Now it was just an empty, sad place. She adjusted the bags on her shoulders and looked down the street. Her feet didn't know where to go, but they started moving anyway. The sidewalk was cracked, with little weeds growing through. Liana walked slowly, her arms aching from carrying the heavy bags. Cars passed by, but no one noticed the sad woman walking along the curb. The gray sky stretched above, big and heavy. The cold air bit at her skin. She hadn't thought about where she would go. She had packed quickly, just clothes, her vitamins, her favorite book, the Velveteen Rabbit, and a little box of ultrasound pictures and dreams that now felt broken. She was 6 months pregnant, alone and without a home. The baby kicked under her coat. She put her hand on her belly. I'm sorry, she whispered. Finally, Liana reached an old public library a few blocks away. The building was old and dark, but it was warm inside. The lady at the front desk nodded at her belly, but didn't say anything. Liana sat down in a corner chair, set her bags beside her trolley, and pulled out her phone. The battery was at 9%. No charger, no plan. She looked through her contacts. Most people were too far away. She almost called her sister, but they hadn't spoken in 2 years after a fight about Jason. She sent a text to her friend Helena. Hey, I'm in a bit of a situation. Can I call? 10 minutes passed. Helena saw the message, but didn't answer. The library started to close. The lights flickered and people left. Liana got up slowly. Her legs hurt. Her back hurt. The librarian said it was time to leave. Liana stepped outside. The cold wind hit her even harder. The streetlights looked tired and sad. She walked again, but this time she didn't know where to go. At a gas station, she asked the clerk if he knew a place where she could stay. He pointed north and gave her a napkin with an address. It took an hour of walking to find the shelter. Her feet hurt. Her body hurt. When she got there, the shelter was almost full. The lady behind the desk looked at her with tired eyes and said, Liana could have a temporary bed if there was space. No smiles, no warm welcome, just rules. Liana sat in a hard plastic chair under buzzing lights. Other women sat around her, some with kids, some with sad, tired faces. There were quiet tears, coughs, rustling of bags, and the heavy sound of people trying not to give up. And forth. It felt like she was in a completely different world, a place she never thought she would be. When someone finally called her name, she stood up and followed a kind helper down a dark hallway. The walls were dirty, and the signs were old and hard to read. They brought her to a room with 4 beds. The beds were very small, just big enough for one grown-up. Only one bed was empty. The woman, whose name was Liana, put her bags down quietly and sat on the edge of the mattress. The bed made a loud creaking sound under her weight. Across from her was an older woman. She had tight gray curls and sharp, serious eyes. She didn't say anything. She just stared at Liana with a tired look, like she had seen so many hard things that nothing surprised her anymore. The room was very quiet. Liana didn't try to talk. She pulled her coat closer around her belly and leaned against the wall. Her back hurt badly. Her ankles were swollen and her throat was dry. She hadn't eaten anything since morning. She didn't even know what time it was anymore. All she knew was that she was somewhere she never thought she would be, with strangers all around her, carrying a little life inside her that deserved so much better. That night, Liana couldn't sleep. The mattress was too thin, and the air was hot and stuffy. Somewhere down the hall, someone was crying loudly. It was the kind of crying that made your heart hurt. Someone else yelled back angrily. There were footsteps, doors opening and closing, and the sound of keys rattling. Liana kept her hand on her belly, feeling every little movement of her baby. She needed to feel something real. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the sound of Jason's laugh and the way he had looked at her the first time she told him she loved him. But those memories felt like dreams now, blurry and fading away. The next morning came with no kindness. The bright lights buzzed on at exactly 6 a.m. Volunteers knocked loudly on the doors, telling everyone to wake up and get dressed. Liana got up slowly. Her whole body felt heavy from being so tired. She brushed her teeth with a tiny disposable brush, splashed cold water on her face in the shared bathroom, and went back to her room just as the gray-haired woman was putting on her coat. "You pregnant?" the woman asked without even looking at her. Liana nodded. The woman snorted. "Figures. Figures," she said. She didn't say anything else. She just grabbed an old bag and walked out of the room. Liana stayed there. She sat on her bed, her hands resting on her lap. It was only her second day without Jason, but it felt like 100 years had passed. Later that afternoon, Liana was called to meet a social worker. The social worker was young, maybe around 30 years old. She spoke quickly and looked very tired behind her square glasses. She asked Liana lots of questions about her life, her health, and if she had any family. Liana answered quietly, feeling like she was falling apart with every word. The social worker gave her a bunch of papers about help she could get, like food stamps, places to live, and jobs she might find. But it was all too much. The words blurred on the page. Liana could only think about the tiny heartbeat she had heard 2 weeks ago on the doctor's machine, strong and steady. She had promised her baby she would keep them safe. But now she didn't know how. That evening, when Liana came back to her room, the gray-haired woman was sitting on her bed, cleaning her shoes with a paper towel. She spoke without looking up. "You'll want to keep your food in your bag," she said. "People take things, and don't leave your shoes by the door. They'll get stolen." Liana paused. "Thank you," she said softly. The woman grunted. "Don't thank me, just be smart." Liana sat in silence for a while, then she whispered, "I'm Liana." The woman finally looked at her. "Name's Gladys," she said. Her eyes softened just a little bit. "You're too quiet. That's going to be a problem here." "I'm not used to this," Liana admitted. "No one is," Gladys said, "until they are." They didn't talk much more that night, but as Liana lay on her creaky bed, listening to the sounds of footsteps and the distant hum of the city outside the dirty window, she felt a small comfort from Gladys's presence. It wasn't exactly kindness, but it wasn't cruelty either. It was something real. The next few days were all the same. Wake up, get dressed, eat if there was food, try to find a job, sleep among strangers, and do it all again. Liana tried calling Helena, a friend, but no one answered. She left a voicemail she wished she could take back. Then she turned off her phone to save the battery. Gladys, even though she was grumpy, seemed to look out for Liana. She reminded her to take her vitamins, showed her which shower had the best water, and even gave her half a peanut butter sandwich one night when there wasn't enough food. "You're carrying more than just yourself," Gladys said gruffly. Liana was surprised by how much it meant to her. Not just the sandwich, but that someone cared. For the first time since Jason sent her away, Liana didn't feel invisible. One night, lying in the dark, Liana whispered, "I don't know what to do." Gladys didn't answer right away. Then, in the dark, she said, "My niece works at a radio station. She runs a show where people tell their stories. If you tell yours, maybe someone will listen. Maybe they'll help." "I don't want pity," Liana said quietly. "It ain't pity," Gladys said. "It's a lifeline." Liana thought about it. Speaking on the radio, telling strangers her story, it made her stomach twist. But so did the thought of staying here, having her baby in a place like this. Her baby kicked, and she put her hand over the spot. Maybe, just maybe, someone out there would listen. The next days moved slowly. Each one felt the same. Wake up, eat, look for a job, sleep. The shelter had its own rhythm. Early mornings, meals that weren't always warm, tired feet shuffling through the hallways, soft voices talking about lost homes and lost jobs. Liana became part of that rhythm without even meaning to. Her pregnancy was more obvious now. Her belly grew bigger every day. Her feet swelled and she was always tired. The baby moved a lot, sometimes gently, sometimes so strongly she had to stop walking for a moment. Every kick reminded her that time was passing, whether she was ready or not. Gladys had become like a lighthouse in the fog. She didn't show affection, but she was there, solid and real. Every morning she polished her shoes and tied the same navy scarf around her neck. She didn't talk about her past much, but Liana learned little pieces. Gladys had a daughter she hadn't seen in many years, a job she had lost a long time ago, and a heart that didn't trust promises. "You keep your expectations low," Gladys said one morning, handing Liana the first half of her coffee from a chipped thermos. "That way you won't be disappointed." Liana took a sip and smiled a little. "What happens if something good actually happens?" Liana asked. "Then you be real quiet about it," Gladys said, "and you hold on with both hands." Their talks were short but important. In a place where so many people felt like ghosts, Gladys really saw her, and Liana didn't know how much she needed that. One evening after dinner, canned soup, a piece of bread, and a bruised apple, Liana sat in the common room watching the news on a small old TV. The volume was low. Words ran across the bottom of the screen. The news talked about rent prices going up. Someone scoffed loudly from the back. "Tell me something I don't know," a voice muttered. Gladys sat beside Liana, knitting something in crazy orange and purple yarn. She didn't look up when she said, "You should talk to my niece." Liana turned to her. "The one who works at the radio station?" Gladys nodded. "I told her about you, just a little. She's interested." Liana felt her stomach tighten. "What did you tell her?" "That you have a story worth hearing," Gladys said. Liana felt scared. Sharing her pain with strangers felt too big, too much. "I don't know if I can," Liana said softly. "It feels selfish, like I'm asking for attention." Gladys looked up. "There's a big difference between asking for attention and asking for help. People can't care if they don't know. That's not your fault." The next day, after a restless night and a long walk around the shelter courtyard, Liana agreed to meet Gladys's niece. Her name was Evelyn. She came that afternoon wearing jeans and a soft gray coat. Her curly hair was tied in a bun, and she carried a big bag across her shoulder. Her smile was kind, but not fake. She shook Liana's hand like she was meeting a friend, not just someone in need. "I'm really glad you're willing to talk," Evelyn said. "I've done a lot of stories about housing problems, but real voices make people listen. If you're ready, we can just talk today. No pressure." They found a quiet room near the office. Evelyn set up a small recorder and gave Liana a bottle of water. Liana's hands shook a little. She wasn't sure what would happen. Would she start crying? Would she fall apart? But it wasn't like that. It was more like letting out a breath she had been holding forever. She spoke slowly at first. She told Evelyn about Jason, how they met, how they dreamed of having a child, how they were so happy when they found out she was pregnant. Then she told about the day everything ended, how Jason looked out the window and said cold, distant words, how he sent her away, how she stood outside alone, carrying not just her bags, but a baby who didn't even know their world had changed. Evelyn didn't interrupt. She just listened and wrote notes, her eyes kind and steady. When Liana finished her story, the room was silent. "Thank you," Evelyn said softly. "You didn't have to share, but I'm so glad you did." Liana felt tired, but also lighter, like she wasn't carrying the whole world on her shoulders anymore. "What happens now?" Liana asked. "We'd like you to come on the radio," Evelyn said. "It won't be live. We can record it first. You'll have control. But I think people need to hear this to remember it could happen to anyone. You did everything right, and still..." The Liana waited a little bit, then nodded and said okay. On the day of the recording, Liana was very nervous. The radio station was small but nice, with glass walls and a soft buzzing sound from the computers in the halls. Evelyn met Liana at the front door and showed her how everything worked. She explained how the interview would go and told Liana she could stop anytime she wanted. They sat in a small room with soft walls and big microphones hanging down like shiny birds. A producer gave them a sign to start. Evelyn leaned in and said, "I'm here with Liana Evans, a woman whose story touched my heart. She is going to share her story with us today." Liana took a deep breath, then started talking. The words came easier this time. She didn't just talk about what happened, she talked about how it made her feel. She spoke about how being betrayed made her feel unsafe, how living in the shelter made her feel small, and how every day now was full of questions. She didn't cry, her voice was strong. She talked about what it was like to have a baby growing inside her while her life was falling apart. "I don't know how I'll raise this baby," she said. "I don't know where we'll live or how I'll work or what the future will look like, but I want him to know that I tried. I didn't give up, even when it felt like the whole world gave up on me." When the interview ended, Evelyn thanked her again and promised to stay in touch. Liana left the radio station feeling open and proud. She had spoken her truth. She had let people see her. Back at the shelter, Gladys was waiting in the hallway with a paper cup full of hot instant coffee. She didn't ask how it went. She just gave Liana the cup and said, "Now we wait." Liana sipped the bitter coffee and nodded. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel invisible. Someone had heard her voice. Maybe, just maybe, it was the start of something new. The morning the interview aired, the sky was covered in thick gray clouds. The city looked dim and sleepy. At the shelter, everything was the same. Volunteers gave out trays of oatmeal, Liana walked around in slippers and old coats, and children played noisily with plastic toys in the corner. But Liana sat in the small TV room, one hand resting on her belly. She stared at the old radio in the corner that crackled with static. The voices hadn't come through yet, but her heart was already thumping like a drum inside her chest. Evelyn had called the night before to tell her the interview would air between 7 and 8 in the morning. It would also be posted online, but the idea of people hearing it live right then made it feel real and big. Liana didn't know how many people would listen or what they would think. She only knew that she had told her truth. And because of that, something inside her had changed. At 10 minutes past 7, the announcer's voice came through the radio, warm and calm. "Good morning. This is Evelyn Daniels with our weekly story. Today's story is about strength, loss, and never giving up. I spoke with Liana Evans, a woman living in a shelter. Her story touched my heart, and I think it will touch yours too." There was a small pause. Then Liana's voice filled the room. It was strange to hear herself like that, clear and strong. Her words floated through the room. Other women looked up from their chairs. One woman turned the volume up a little bit. Liana listened carefully, almost like she wasn't the one who had spoken. She listened to herself talk about love, fear, and betrayal, not as weakness, but as truth. And when she said, "I don't know how I'll raise this child, but I know I won't give up," the whole room became very quiet. Not heavy, just full of feeling. When the story ended, the radio went back to regular music. People started talking again. But Liana stayed in her chair, her hand gripping the armrest. Across the room, a woman in a purple hoodie gave her a small nod. Another woman, holding a toddler, mouthed the words, "Thank you." Liana looked at them and gave a small smile, her throat tight with emotion. Later that afternoon, Evelyn called again. "The phones haven't stopped ringing," she said, out of breath. "We always get some calls, but this time, people are really responding. They want to help." Liana leaned against the cold wall, Annette holding the warm phone to her ear. "Help?" she repeated, surprised. "Yes," said Evelyn. Donations, letters. One woman cried and said she wanted to knit baby blankets for you. A retired teacher wants to start a GoFundMe for you. We already got 3 boxes of maternity clothes. Liana closed her eyes, feeling overwhelmed. She had thought maybe a few people would say something kind. She never imagined this much kindness. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything, Evelyn said gently. Just be open. People care. Over the next few days, the shelter looked like a mini post office. Packages started arriving, many just addressed to Liana, the woman from the radio. Inside were baby onesies, boxes of diapers, and letters written in all kinds of handwriting. You're not alone. We believe in you. Thank you for sharing your story. Some letters had phone numbers and emails, offering childcare, places to live, and job ideas. It was a lot to take in. Liana kept a special box under her bed just for the letters. At night, when the shelter was quiet, she would pull them out and read them one by one. Gladys tried not to make a big deal about it. People love a good story, she said, sipping her tea. Doesn't mean they'll stick around when things get hard. But even Gladys smiled when a group of high school students delivered handmade cards covered in glitter and stars. The cards said things like, "You're strong," and "Your baby is lucky to have you." One card showed a drawing of a house with smoke from the chimney and a woman holding a baby. Liana kept that card in her coat pocket. Then one morning, Evelyn came rushing back into the shelter, cheeks pink from the cold and eyes shining. "A coffee shop owner heard your story," she said. "He's offering you a part-time job and a place to live. He has a little room above his cafe. It's not fancy, but it's warm and private. He'll even help you with doctor bills if you need it." Liana stared at her, speechless. "He wants to meet you," Evelyn added softly. "No pressure, but this could be a real chance." It took Liana a long time to decide, not because she didn't want it, but because hope felt scary. She had spent so long preparing for disappointment, it was hard to believe something good might actually last. That evening, she met Mason, the cafe owner. He was a kind man in his 50s, with warm eyes and rough hands. His cafe smelled like cinnamon and coffee. The room upstairs was small but clean. It had a bed, a dresser, a tiny kitchen, and a big window where the sunlight poured in. Liana stood in the doorway, tears in her eyes. She could picture herself living there, rocking her baby to sleep, feeling the cozy warmth from the cafe below. "I don't need much," she said quietly. "Just somewhere to feel safe." Mason smiled. "Then it's yours," he said. Back at the shelter, Liana packed her things, but this time not because she was scared. She hugged Gladys at the door. Gladys grumbled, but hugged her back. "Come visit," Liana said. Gladys waved her hand and said, "Just don't forget where you came from." Liana stepped outside into the cool, bright afternoon, her bags feeling lighter than ever. In her heart, something was blooming, not full certainty, but a soft beginning of hope. The next few days were busy and exciting. Liana moved into the room above the cafe and started working a few shifts, wiping tables, learning the cash register, and shyly chatting with customers. Some customers recognized her. "Are you the woman from the radio?" they would ask. Liana would nod, feeling both proud and a little shy. Donations kept coming. Evelyn stayed in touch and helped guide everything. Mason even set up a little corner inside the cafe called Liana's Corner, with a handwritten sign. There was a chalkboard where people could leave notes. "You've got this. One day at a time. We're rooting for you." Liana would read the notes during her breaks, each one making her feel warm inside. At night, she sat by her window, drinking tea, watching the quiet street below. She still didn't have a full plan for the future, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't scared. She was leaning toward the light. And in that peaceful room, with her baby moving softly inside her, and the sounds of laughter from the cafe downstairs, Liana whispered a promise. "We're going to be okay," she said, and this time she truly believed it. The small room above the cafe soon felt like home. It wasn't the bed or the kitchen that made it special. It was the simple fact that it was hers, not something borrowed from a mean husband, not something shared with strangers, not something that could be taken away. It was hers. That first night, Liana unpacked slowly. She put her clothes neatly in the dresser. She placed her old book, The Velveteen Rabbit, on the windowsill. She stacked the baby things she received into neat piles. It wasn't a nursery yet, but she began to dream. Maybe a cradle in the corner. Maybe tiny socks in a basket. Maybe fairy lights above the window. Not big things, but sweet, small things. Downstairs, the cafe was full of warmth. Mason greeted every customer like an old friend. People knew each other's favorite coffee. Laughter floated from table to table like the smell of cinnamon rolls. At first, Liana stayed quiet, wiping tables and filling sugar containers. But slowly the customers started noticing her. Some recognized her from the radio. Others just saw her baby bump and gave her kind smiles. "You're the brave one," a woman said one day, touching Liana's hand gently. "I heard your story. You remind me of my sister. She raised her son alone. Now he's a teacher." Another time, a college student left a sticky note under her muffin wrapper. It said, "Your voice stayed with me. Thank you for not staying silent." The notes and kindness didn't stop. Neither did the donations, and Evelyn, true to her word, stayed by her side. Every week, Liana went to the cafe. She would give updates about her story on the radio. The station decided to keep a short radio segment about her journey. It wasn't to take advantage of her story, but to show listeners that kindness can make a difference. It was a way to remind people that showing love can help create real change. One afternoon, Mason, who worked at the cafe, wheeled in 2 big boxes. A delivery driver had dropped them off. Liana opened the boxes carefully. Inside, there were diapers, baby formula, baby shampoo, and a new baby carrier. There was also a card with a picture of a smiling couple. The card said, "We tried for years to have a baby. When we heard your story, we felt it in our hearts. If we had a daughter, we would name her after you. We hope this helps a little." Liana sat on the floor with the gifts. The card was in her lap. She could feel the weight of the kindness, not the boxes, but the love in the gift. It felt heavy, but in a good way. She put her hand on her stomach and whispered, "See, there are good people. We're not alone." Mason decided to set up a corner in the cafe for people to donate. He cleared a small shelf and put up a sign above it that said, "Community Cradle, helping Liana and baby." Customers started bringing small things like knitted hats, gift cards, baby books, and even a silver rattle. One customer wrote a note with the rattle, "To new beginnings." Even the customers who didn't bring gifts showed kindness in other ways. They asked how she was feeling, how far along she was, and if she had picked a name. Some customers shared their own stories about being mothers, facing hard times, or starting over. As Liana listened to these stories, she realized that suffering wasn't something rare. Many people had gone through hard times, and their stories connected them in ways she hadn't imagined. The cafe became more than just a job for her. It became a way to heal. As she cleaned the floors, made coffee, and heard the noise of people talking and cups clinking, she felt better. It gave her a sense of purpose. She took pride in the way she folded napkins, the freshness of the pastries, and the warmth of her smile when customers came in. Mason noticed how different Liana seemed. One evening after closing, he gave her a sealed envelope. "Some customers asked if you had a fund set up," he said. "I told them I'd hold on to it until you were ready." Inside the envelope were many bills and some checks. One note said, "For the nursery, you'll know what it needs." Another note simply said, "Because no mother should face the world alone." Liana didn't know if she could accept all the money. Mason looked at her gently and said, "You've already accepted it. When you told your story, you gave people a chance to help. Don't take that chance away from them." That night, Liana counted the money carefully and put it in a lockbox Mason kept in the office. She even made a spreadsheet to track all the donations. It wasn't just about getting by anymore. It was about building something lasting for her baby. On her days off, she went to thrift stores and picked out baby clothes, bottles, and blankets. She found a secondhand bassinet with a mobile of tiny stars and a soft rocking chair that made a creaky sound but still worked. She washed everything by hand in the kitchen sink. As she worked, she hummed and made the baby's room feel more like home. It didn't feel like a temporary place to stay anymore. It felt like a new beginning. With that change, Liana felt something deep inside, peace. It wasn't perfect peace, but it was there. She felt it in the quiet mornings when the sun peeked over the rooftops, in the laughter of a child at the cafe, and in the warm squeeze of a customer's hand who was once a stranger. One evening, after closing, Mason sat down across from Liana. He wrapped his hands around a mug of decaf coffee. "You've got something special," he said quietly. "Not just your story, but the way you carry it with dignity." Liana wasn't sure how to reply. Mason continued, "I see a lot of people who come through here. Most are looking for a place to land. But you're building something." Liana smiled, resting her hand on her belly. "I'm trying." Mason nodded. "That's all any of us can do." As the cafe lights dimmed and the streets outside grew quiet, Liana stood at the top of the stairs leading to her room. Behind her, the cafe was ready for the next day. Ahead of her, the soft glow of her little home waited. The help she had received had not just kept her going, it had helped her find her way. Though she didn't know what the future would bring, she felt steady and strong, taking one small step at a time. The days grew longer, not just in hours but in warmth. Spring was slowly making its way into the city. The snow had melted into puddles on the sidewalks, and the trees, still bare, seemed to be preparing to bloom. From her window above the cafe, Liana watched the season change like a slow, careful book. She felt something change inside her too. Her belly had grown bigger. What had once been a small presence was now a round, firm weight, a reminder that her baby was on the way. She moved more slowly now. Her steps were careful, and her breath was shorter when she climbed the stairs. But there was a grace in her slowness, a rhythm she was learning. The baby kicked often, sometimes with strong pushes, sometimes with gentle nudges. Liana could feel the difference between a stretch and a nudge, a hiccup and a flutter. Sometimes she would place both hands on her belly and whisper things to the baby. These moments, when they were alone, were her favorite. They didn't need words, just quiet and connection. At the cafe, she wasn't just an employee anymore. She had become part of the place. The customers greeted her by name now. Some brought gifts like extra muffins, mittens for the baby, or a bedtime storybook. One older woman gave her a small jar of homemade jam. "For the mornings when you feel tired," she said with a wink. "And trust me, there will be many." Mason had trusted her with more responsibilities. She learned to work the register, handle deliveries, and even try her hand at baking. With his quiet guidance, Liana grew more confident. It didn't happen all at once, but step by step. She started looking forward to the daily routine, the early mornings, the smell of warm pastries, and the soft buzz of conversations that filled the cafe. But even with all the comfort she had found, Liana knew she couldn't get too comfortable. The baby was coming soon, and with him would come new challenges. She kept a notebook by her bed where she wrote lists, things to research, things to apply for, and things to figure out. She read parenting books from the library, went to free classes, and kept every doctor's appointment. One day, Liana sat alone in a waiting room, watching a mother try to entertain her twin toddlers with snacks and stickers. The children's laughter filled the room, happy but loud. Liana smiled as she felt her baby move inside her. Later that night, as she lay in bed, her mind wouldn't stop racing. She thought about diapers, midnight feedings, fevers, and first steps. She thought about Jason, if he ever thought about her and the baby. She wasn't sure he did, but sometimes she let herself think that maybe he had heard her story on the radio and had thought about them. She didn't want him to hurt anymore. She just wanted distance. That night, she sat by the window, feeling the cool glass against her hand and watching the quiet city below. It felt peaceful, like a breath held just before dawn. The next morning, Liana woke up early and decided to write. She didn't plan it, she just started. She wrote a letter to her unborn son, telling him about the snow, the day she had been left behind, the woman who had helped her in the shelter, and the kindness she had found at the cafe. She wrote about hope, not the big kind, but the quiet kind that grows with small acts. From then on, Liana wrote every day, sometimes to the baby, sometimes to herself. She wrote about her fears, her joys, the first time she felt the baby kick, and the healing she found in washing a donated blanket. Her words flowed out, not to share, but to remember. She always wanted to remember every moment, not because it was always beautiful, but because it was real. One day, Mason found her sitting at the corner table in the cafe, reading from her notebook before her shift. He sat across from her, sipping his coffee. "You write a lot," he said. Liana nodded. "It helps," she replied. Mason looked at the cover of her notebook. "Do you ever think about sharing it?" Liana gently closed the book. "I shared it once on the radio. That was enough." Mason tilted his head. "Maybe, but sometimes stories don't end. They just grow." She didn't say anything, but those words stayed with her. That weekend, Liana got a package with no return address. Inside was a quilt, carefully made with tiny animals stitched into the fabric. There was also a letter in beautiful handwriting. "I was where you are once, 20 years ago. Different city, different man, same fear. I raised my daughter alone. It was hard, it was messy, but it was worth it. The quilt is hers. She's in college now. She said to give it to someone who might need it. I think she meant you." Liana ran her fingers over the fabric, tears in her eyes. She placed the quilt on the glider chair and sat next to it, holding her belly. "See," she whispered, "someone made it through, so can we." Her room above the cafe started to fill with life. The bassinet was ready. A small dresser held clothes, neatly folded by size and season. There were stacks of books, a mobile of stars that tinkled softly when the window was open, and a shelf of tiny shoes. Every item had a story. A stranger's kindness, a quiet act of care, a reminder that she was not forgotten. Sometimes she wondered what her baby would be like. Would he have her eyes or Jason's smile? Would he love music, books, or the sound of rain? Would he ask about his father one day? She didn't know, but she knew this. He would be loved fiercely, endlessly, without condition. At the cafe, spring arrived. The windows were open more often. People stayed at tables, talking about gardens and graduations. Liana moved slower now, resting often. Her shifts got shorter, thanks to Mason's insistence. "You've done enough," he told her. "Time to put your feet up." She agreed, but she kept coming in, helping where she could. She greeted regulars and sat by the counter with her notebook. One afternoon, a young woman came up to her, smiling but unsure. "Are you Lianan?" she asked. Liana nodded. The woman's eyes were full of tears. "I was in a shelter last year. I heard your interview. It helped me leave. Someone helped me believe I could be okay." Liana stood up slowly and hugged her. No words were needed. Later, Liana sat alone in the quiet cafe, opening her notebook again. Maybe Mason was right. Maybe some stories don't end. Maybe they grow. That night, as Liana lay in bed, the baby shifted in her belly. A dull ache settled in her back. She knew the signs. Not yet, but close. Very close. She placed her hands on her stomach, breathed in the scent of lavender from the candle on her dresser, and whispered, "We're almost there." Her path behind her had been long and crooked, filled with sorrow and strength. The path ahead was still unknown, but she wasn't afraid anymore. The first ache came early the next morning. It was faint, but unmistakable. Liana woke to the soft gray light of dawn filtering through the window. The air was still chilly, and she lay still for a moment, listening. The city hadn't woken yet. The cafe below was quiet. The ache in her back pulsed gently, then faded. She pressed her hand to her stomach, breathing slowly, counting the seconds. The baby shifted, but didn't protest. It wasn't time yet, but something had changed. Liana sat up slowly, groaning softly. She shuffled into the small kitchen, heating water for tea and pulling on a warm sweater. She moved carefully, like someone who knew her body well. The baby was full of life lately, his kicks less frantic, more deliberate. It felt like he was preparing too. She felt him stretch against her ribs as she sipped from her mug and looked out the window. The view hadn't changed much. The same stretch of brick buildings, the same lamppost flickering as the morning light grew stronger. But Liana saw it all differently now. Her room no longer felt like borrowed space. It felt like a beginning that she had earned. She moved more slowly these days, not just because of her size. She had grown cautious with her hope, protecting it and nurturing it. But this morning, as the ache returned, sharper this time, she allowed herself to admit it. She was ready for whatever came next. Downstairs, the cafe came to life. Mason arrived before opening, carrying 2 bags of flour and humming under his breath. When he saw Liana, he paused, wiping his hands on his apron. "You okay?" he asked, noticing her pale face. She hesitated. "I think it's starting. Maybe? I'm not sure yet." He nodded, calm as ever. "You want me to drive you to the hospital?" "Not yet," she said. "I just wanted to be around people for a bit, just in case." Mason didn't argue. He cleared a stool behind the counter and brought her a small plate of toast and fruit. "We'll keep an eye on things," he said. The morning passed in a blur of faces and voices. The usual comfort of the cafe surrounded her. Some customers left notes. One woman brought a hand-woven blanket and placed it gently on the donation shelf with a soft smile. Another left a bag of groceries with a note. "For when the baby comes, you've got this." By midday, Evelyn appeared, her cheeks flushed from the wind. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, though Liana suspected she had come on purpose. She had a bag with her. "I brought something," she said, pulling out a manila envelope. "There's a local foundation, Hopewell Family Fund. They support single mothers starting over. We ran a follow-up story last week and they want to help." Liana opened the envelope slowly, her breath catching as she pulled out the papers inside. There were letters of confirmation, gift certificates, a signed agreement for financial support for prenatal and postnatal care, child care assistance for the first year, and a housing grant for transitioning to a long-term rental. At the very bottom was a handwritten letter. "Your story reminded me of my mother. She raised me alone. She never asked for help, but she needed it. I wish someone had stepped in for her sooner. This is our way of doing that now, for her, for you." Liana read the letter twice, then carefully placed it back in the envelope, her hands shaking. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Evelyn smiled. "You don't have to say anything. You already said enough." It was late afternoon when the phone rang. Mason answered and spoke for a moment, then passed the receiver to Liana. "It's for you." Liana took the phone, surprised. "Hello?" A warm voice greeted her. "Miss Evans? My name is Isla Montgomery. I'm a volunteer coordinator at the First Street Community Center. We've been following your story, and we're wondering if you'd be open to receiving some in-person support. We've partnered with several local groups who want to help prepare your space for the baby." Liana blinked, stunned. I don't know. I mean, yes, of course, but we understand it's a lot," Isla continued, "but you've inspired a lot of people. Let us do this for you." The next day, volunteers began arriving. They came with paint, tools, boxes, and boundless energy. Some were teenagers, others were retirees, and some were young mothers with babies of their own. They cleaned and organized, set up shelves, hung curtains, and added soft lighting. They transformed the simple upstairs room into a soft, inviting haven for Liana and her baby. When it was finished, the room felt like a promise, not just from the people who had helped, but from Liana herself. A week later, her water broke. She arrived at the hospital, exhausted but calm. She had her notebook with her, as she always did. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid. The labor was long and difficult, but Liana felt it was somehow a reflection of everything she had lived through. She was tested, yes, but each wave of pain only made her stronger. Finally, after hours of pushing and waiting, she heard a cry. Liana's heart skipped a beat. She held the tiny baby, a boy, in her arms. "Welcome to the world, Theo," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "We're going to be okay." As the nurse cleaned Theo up, Liana felt the overwhelming weight of everything that had happened and everything that was still to come. She had been lost once, she had been forgotten, but now her life was full. The baby's eyes blinked up at her, trusting, pure, and full of possibility. Everything else faded. This was her family now. This was her beginning. "Everything's going to be okay, little one," she whispered, knowing she meant it. Thanks for watching. If you liked the story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Check out our other videos too. See you in the next one.